Hey everybody, today we're at Fort Morgan State Park at Fort Morgan in southern Alabama on the Mobile Bay. And we'll be exploring the fort and kind of showing you some of the highlights and talking about the history of this place. So let's go.
Let's do it.
Let's go. Fort Morgan is located in southwest Alabama along the Gulf Coast, south of Mobile and west of Gulf Shores, Alabama. Construction on Fort Morgan began in 1819. The fort was built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, mostly through the use of African American slaves. Brick and mortar were the only materials that could be obtained locally. Other essential construction materials such as finished granite, sandstone, ironwork, and cement had to be shipped by water from New York. The fort was known as the Work on Mobile Point until April 1833, when it was named to honor Revolutionary War hero General Daniel Morgan. Fort Morgan was completed in 1834. Fort Morgan was active during 4 wars: the Civil War, Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. Fort Morgan was initially constructed as Fort Boyer. Fort Boyer was constructed by the U.S. Army during 1813 to guard against possible British attack. The small log and sand fortification was attacked twice by the British during the War of 1812. The first attack, made by 4 British warships and a combined force of British Royal Marines and Creek Indians, came on September 15, 1814. The ensuing battle was total American victory. 1 warship, the HMS Hermes, was sunk, and the Marines and Creek Indians were forced to withdraw. During a second battle, which took place during early February 1815, a combination British land and naval force forced the vastly outnumbered American troops to surrender the fort. By the terms of the treaty that ended the War of 1812, the British had to return Fort Boyer to the United States. Fort Boyer defended Mobile Point until the early 1920s. In March of 1861, the Confederate officers hired the wives of soldiers to launder the clothing of the garrison. Quarters such as these normally held 2 women and their children, while their husbands lived in the barracks. The women were often looked down upon by the officers, even though they were paid more than the soldiers. In early 1861, the state of Alabama purchased lumber for bunks, blankets, straw for bedding, and lamp oil for use in the quarters. The soldiers stored their weapons and equipment on racks at the end of the bunks. There were 1,075 soldiers serving at Fort Morgan in April of 1861. After the War of 1812, the federal government began building what is known as Third System Brick Coastal Defense Forts. Construction began on Fort Morgan in 1819, but due to its isolated location, it was not completed until 1834. Skilled masons, many of whom were enslaved African Americans, built the fortification, which contains more than 46 million cubic yards of brick.
You guys get the chain ball, raise it, lower it up. We're gonna raise or lower the gun, and then we're gonna load it up. Then we're gonna raise it. We're gonna shoot. That's how they did that. I wonder how they did that.
Designed to control the main ship channel into Mobile Bay, the star shape of Fort Morgan allowed its defenders to bring a heavy concentration of artillery fire on an enemy fleet as it approached the fort and moved into the bay. The fort was also designed with extensive land defenses to help enable it to withstand a siege. During the Civil War, Fort Morgan was seized by troops of the state of Alabama on January 4, 1861. Turned over to the Confederate Army in the March of 1861, the fort served as the first line of defense for the city of Mobile and provided protection for blockade runners entering Mobile Bay. On the morning of August 5, 1864, Union naval forces fought their way past the Fort Morgan and defeated a Confederate naval squadron, which included the CSS Tennessee, one of the most powerful ironclads constructed in the South during the war. Union land forces commenced siege operations against Fort Morgan on August 9th. On the morning of August 22nd, Union artillery began one of the most intense bombardments of a single fort recorded during the Civil War. The Confederates' losses were 17 men killed. The Confederate garrison's 581 men were forced to surrender the next morning.
None of that stuff's around here close.
The fort is historically significant for its Civil War role in the Battle of Mobile Bay. It is here on August 5, 1864, Union Admiral David Farragut ordered his fleet to charge the heavily mined bay. At the time, tethered naval mines were known as torpedoes. "Damn the torpedoes," said Farragut. "4 bells, Captain Drayton. Go ahead. Full speed." After the Battle of Mobile Bay, soldiers of Fort Morgan endured a 2-week siege by Union forces before surrendering on August 23, 1864.
Like that state.
Not supposed to, I don't think. And it's not here.
Efforts to stop water from seeping through Fort Morgan's casement arches began before the fort was completed in 1834. By 1858, in spite of 8 attempts to solve the problem, the leaks continued. This project addresses the water issues and casemate ceiling cracks on the fort's eastern side. These cracks may date to 1864, when this part of the fort bore the brunt of the Union artillery fire. Expansion and contraction from cyclical heating and cooling likely contributed to the problem. The current investigation found the water leaks were also forcing sand into the cracks. This puts pressure on the fort's inner parade walls and compounds the problem. Hurricane Katrina made these cracks worse. The Alabama Historical Commission is stabilizing the casemates, funded in part by Hurricane Recovery Grant administered by the National Park Service.
powder now, and what do you say, it's where it stored their powder? What you say?
Yeah, here's the hose for the air circulation for the black hose. Powder magazine. It said it had 2 of these.
How good is it hold up in hurricane, Baltimore County?
Under the supervision of the ordnance officer, an ordnance sergeant was responsible for the care of arms, ammunition, and other military stores on a post. Usually a gunsmith by trade, the ordnance sergeant remained busy ensuring proper amounts of ammunition, spare parts, and target materials were on hand. The number of ordnance sergeants could not exceed 1 per military post. Ordnance Sergeant Stuart Patterson was Fort Morgan's last occupant before the Montgomery Rifles seized the fort from federal forces in 1861. The introduction of rifled, artillery, and steam-powered warships during the Civil War made masonry fortifications like Fort Morgan obsolete. This was dramatically demonstrated on August 5, 1864, when Union Admiral David Farragut led his fleet past the guns of defenders and into the bay with the loss of only 1 ship. Following the Civil War, the Army moved slowly to improve the nation's coastal defenses. It was not until the 1890s that major improvements were undertaken. The Board of Fortifications, or Endicott Board, recommended 5 modern gun batteries, as well as naval mines at Fort Morgan. Constructed between 1895 and 1904, these batteries housed 19 guns and mortars, the most modern weapons of the day. The concrete batteries were manned during the Spanish-American War and World War I. The military occupied Fort Morgan more than 2 years during World War II. By that time, the concrete batteries, like the brick fort before them, were no longer the primary defensive positions. The military returned the fort to the state after the war, ending an era of coastal defense. Got a rifled barrel. I don't know if it's coming out or not, but it's rifled.
Yeah, that's right.
It even had a suspension system.
Yeah, there's like lakes that set in here.
Beginning in 1895, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began construction of a new fortification system at Fort Morgan. Reinforced concrete batteries replaced the old brick fort as the main fortification, protecting Mobile Bay. During time of war, electronically detonated underwater mines protected the entrance to Mobile Bay. Between 1900 and 1923, Fort Morgan became the largest permanent military base in Alabama with a garrison of over 400 coast artillery soldiers. Over 100 structures were built by the U.S. Army Quartermaster Department to support the coast defense mission. During World War I, 2,000 troops were stationed at the fort. Many of these men trained on the new artillery weapons that were becoming commonplace on the battlefields in France. With the end of the World War, Fort Morgan's garrison was steadily reduced, and in 1923 the post was ordered closed. However, Fort Morgan's role as a coast defense post was not over. In November 1941, the U.S. Navy reoccupied the post, and in April 1942, units of the 50th Coast Artillery Regiment arrived to renew the fort's coastal defense mission. In July 1944, Fort Morgan was abandoned for the last time, and its role in America's coast defense officially came to an end. Alright, so that's Fort Morgan. Pretty cool, actually. Some significant history. Nice restrooms. I would recommend bug spray. We just got absolutely ate up by mosquitoes and no-see-ums, and also sunscreen. So that's it. Fort Morgan, cool history. Have a good one.